Hi there everybody, this is Dave Dubeau with another episode of Canadian Profits TV. So you can see we've got a little bit of a different background here today. I'm coming at you right before one of my live rent-own three-way payday events, which I'm holding here in Abbotsford, BC here today. Actually, I'm in Burnaby right now. It's my lunchtime event here in Burnaby. Anyhow, what's going on with this week with Canadian Profits TV? For our business breakthrough, I want to talk about the loneliest number of all, which is the number one, why you want to avoid that at all costs. For our real estate tips, I'm going to share a big tip I just got reinforced from our good friend Darren Weeks from Fast Track. And for our Mindset Minute, we're going to share a lesson from Wayne Dyer. Stay tuned. Okay, so for this week's business breakthrough, I want to talk about the loneliest number of all, and that number is 1. What do I mean by that? Well, a lot of times in our businesses, sometimes we get to the point where we're very, very dependent on one or two sources or one or two clients for our whole business, or one or two government entities, that sort of thing. This was just brought home very recently. A good friend of mine whose business was completely revolved around dealing with the government and banks. And unfortunately, if the big guys change the rules, that can completely screw your business. So he was very, very dependent on one source for his business. That went away, he's in big trouble. When I had my language school in Costa Rica, I always got a little nervous if I had a really big client that became overpowering, that had a really, really large chunk of my business was tied up with just one customer, one client. That made me nervous. So I always like to have big clients for sure, but lots of little clients as well, in case that one didn't work out, it wouldn't sink me. So the loneliest number of all in business is 1. Make sure that you've always got a plan B and you're not just dependent on one source for your customers. That's your business breakthrough for this week. Okay, so for our real estate tip this week, I want to talk about something that got reinforced by Darren Weeks this week. I was in Victoria doing these events, and Darren was also in Victoria at the same time. He invited me over to his client appreciation or investor appreciation event. It was very, very good, and it just reminded me as real estate investors how important it is to always be communicating with our investors. Not just communicating with them, but educating and re-educating our investors as well. Quite often we forget that just because we're involved in real estate full-time or even part-time, but very, very in-depth involved, doesn't mean that our investors are as interested as we are. Most of the time our investors are trusting in us, investing with us, but they're really investing with us, and they don't remember all of the details about the particular deal that they've invested in. So when you meet up with them again, you tell them how things are going, the good, the okay, the not so good. That's always important. Communicate everything with them. But also you need to re-educate them about the details of the investment. Darren does a fantastic job of doing that. Just a reminder to all of us to do the same. That's your real estate tip for this week. All right, so next up we've got our Mindset Minute. And actually this is something that I just read about this morning. Excellent book, Wisdom of the Ages by Wayne Dyer. I'm working on this, so every morning I kind of have a morning ritual where I get up early and I do some studying first thing in the morning. And I came across this idea this morning when I was reading, and it's about the inner genius in all of us. So Wayne Dyer, who's a brilliant, brilliant man, also I believe he's got a doctorate in education, so he's an educator. When he was taking his doctorate studies, he was learned something by Piaget, who I believe was a Swiss psychologist, educator type person, who did some amazing studies. Took me back to my days in psychology where I got my basically asinine degree in psychology. However, some of that stuff was very useful. This was very, very cool. So Piaget did a study of school children and about learning and how people learn and where they fall in the bell curve of averages. So here's what he came up with. Here's what he found. Is that if you tested children or took children through a school course, here's how things would come out all the time. So you would have a very tiny percentage of students who absolutely didn't understand anything, nothing sunk in. Very, very tiny percentage of that. You have about 3% of students who flunked out, got an F. 12% would get a D. The vast majority were in the C- to C+ range. That would be 67% of everybody. Get about 12% of the folks would get Bs, 3% would get As, and another teeny tiny percentage were absolute geniuses in that particular topic and just blew everybody away. But that was a traditional bell curve. So if the teacher was teaching lecture style where they're just up there yapping away like so many of us recall from school days, this was the bell curve. So what Piaget did that was very, very cool, so this is nothing new. We all kind of know this if we remember back from school. What Piaget did was he said, okay, well, what happens if we change the teaching modality? So what does that mean? So instead of lecturing, perhaps teaching the same material but in a small group setting where people were interacting, working in teams, that sort of thing. His question was, what would the curve look like there? The interesting thing is the curve looked exactly the same. 3% of the teeny tiny percentage of people didn't get anything. 3% flunked, 12% got Ds, vast majority in the mediocre middle, and a few people at the top and a couple of absolute geniuses. So the question is, what's different about that? Same results. Here's what's different about that. The people, how the people were mixed in with this was completely different. So in other words, when you change the modality, the geniuses changed. The people that were up in this top level changed. The people that were in the mediocre middle changed. The bottom, the top, etc. So it wasn't the same people. The curve was the same, but the people were distributed differently. What does that mean to us? That means that we all learn differently, but more importantly, so he did this over a variety of different learning modalities and always came out the same way. Depending on how the topic was taught and learned by the students, depended on where they fell in the curve. But the cool thing was, if they did it enough, it would redistribute, so everybody, depending on the way that they learned, would end up in the top level at some point. What does this mean to you and I? It means that you can forget everything that you've got in your noggin about what kind of a student you are, because you do have the potential to be a genius. You just have to figure out how you learn best. And this is where it takes it back to my days in psychology in university. One of the things that stuck after 20-some years, not much stuck because I had a few too many beers back in school, but this one stuck. And that was the whole idea of these different learning modalities, or different, I can't remember the exact term for it, but basically we all have a genius within us. We all have the ability to be a genius in certain areas. Some people are very scholastically inclined, so they thrive in the traditional school system learning that way. Other people are more tactile, so they learn and they work best touching and feeling and working with things hands-on. Other people are social, so they interact best, they learn best when they're interacting with other people. They're phenomenal communicators. Other people are auditory. All these different things, we all have different learning modalities, but what this study shows is we all have the potential to be at the top end of things if we just figure out how we learn best and focus on learning that way. Anytime we have to learn something new, figure out, how do I learn best? So for example, myself, I really enjoy CDs. I drive a lot, so I enjoy putting CDs in and listening to stuff. So perhaps I'm more auditory. I'm also tactile. I like writing stuff down. So if I can do a combination of those things, it's going to stick much better for me than just reading something, than doing other things. It's the same thing for you. So that's a little bit long-winded, but this really hit me between the eyes today. I wanted to share it with you because it doesn't matter what your past experience was. Figure out how you learn best and you can be an absolute genius. That's your Mindset Minute for this week. All right, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Canadian Profits TV. Want to remind you, we're having our annual Diamond Member Getaway. It's going to be a Rich Dad Getaway in Scottsdale, Arizona. Check that out at CanadianProfitsDiamond.com. Again, CanadianProfitsDiamond.com. That's coming up. If you're interested in that, you need to be a Diamond member, and we've got some great room rates as well, but those are going to be going away at the end of the month. So Diamond members, make sure you get organized. If you're not a Diamond member, you should be. Check out what's all involved at CanadianProfitsDiamond.com. All right, speaking of Diamond members, we've got our upcoming monthly Diamond exclusive webinar which is going to be all about how to make big profits, whatever your business is, by putting on events. So check that out as well. Thanks a lot, everybody, for being part of Canadian Profits TV and tuning in. And tune in next week for our next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.